And should you be brought down, from the earth you shall speak, and from the dust she will be low your saying. And he shall be like a ghost from the earth your voice, and from the dust your saying shall chirp. Hello everyone, this is Gilgamesh, and today we are in Isaiah chapter 29, and this chapter is pretty much one big unit. I'm going to split it into two because, well, it's going to make a long video otherwise. But we start off here with a great verse in verse 1. Woe, Ariel, Ariel, the city where David encamped. Now, as a reminder, this section of Isaiah is known as the woe sections, or the woe oracles, because they start off with this word woe, or the Hebrew word hoi. Here we address Ariel. And no, not that one. We're talking here about the city of Jerusalem, that apparently another epithet for the city of Jerusalem was Ariel. We don't know why. It's kind of interesting. There are all sorts of proposals as to what this word means and why it's associated with Jerusalem. The least strained option is that it means lion of God. The word for lion is Ariel, lion of El, or lion of God. But that makes it not some ordinary lion, but some heraldic lion that, a good candidate would be the Cherubim that are carved over the Ark of the Covenant, or also at other various places in the temple. They were basically winged lions. And so the temple and the creatures that are associated with it there may have become an epithet for the city itself where the temple stood. But it's a complicated word. And while Lion of God is a popular etymology for it, it may not be completely correct. If it is correct, then it makes sense that it would be pointing to the Cherubim in the temple. But the name shows up in Ezra 8:16 as well, and it is the proper name of a person that is returning with the exiles from captivity. His name was Ariel. In Isaiah, it's going to show up twice in this verse, and twice in the next verse, and then once down in verse 7, and then also possibly showing up in Isaiah 33:7 with a slightly different spelling. Isaiah 33:7, it says either behold their Ariel, or possibly behold Ariels shall cry out in the streets. Messengers of peace bitterly shall cry. It's this parallelism here. And different manuscripts actually have different readings there by a single letter. With the Leningrad Codex, the most popular old codex that we use most often here, supporting the reading their Ariel, singular with the word their attached to it. Other manuscripts, you would not have the word their, but you have an extra yod in there that makes it into a plural Ariels. So this plural reading is actually supported by the Vulgate. I favor it because it works as a stronger parallel with messengers or angels, which is plural, in the next line, messengers or angels of peace. So if this is correct, then Ariel is a synonym for messenger of peace. This casts Jerusalem in a very different role from Lion of God. So let's also talk about 2 Samuel 23:20, where the word shows up with a slightly different spelling. Here, Benaiah kills 2 Ariel. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. He also went down and struck down a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen. That's from the ESV there. That's the ESV translation. The Septuagint explicitly says these are some type of men, while the Syriac indicates that they are particularly warriors, and the Vulgate says that they were lions. King James Version tried to have it both ways and translated it as lion-like men. The English Standard Version decided it was best just not to translate the word, and that's probably a wise choice since we're not really clear what it is that this person killed. But he killed 2 of them, and he did it apparently, when he also struck down a lion in a pit on a day that snow had fallen, it just seems oddly specific. Why is snow falling important to this? I don't have any idea. But it leaves us wondering if these were men, and if they were men, what type of men. And it makes a connection with lions, but possibly some type of a sport killing of a lion. This is a mystery as to what it means and why is snow important in this whole process. I will note that it isn't completely clear that the killing of the Ariels and the lion are two separate events. It is possible that this is all one event, possibly in some type of staged combat. The text says the lion, not a lion. And I think it is possible to read this metaphorically, that the killing of these two was seen as a symbolic defeat of Moab. Then the word shows up again in Ezekiel 43, verses 15 through 16, where it refers to an altar for burnt offerings. This has led to connecting it to the possible loanword from Akkadian and Sumerian, Aralu, underworld, and mountain of the gods, the altar for burnt offerings as the world mountain. A oracle priest, perhaps, that operates on that altar area. So now we possibly have this other possible meaning of Ariel as a altar where burnt offerings are given. So we have a variety of meanings here that don't seem to have a lot of overlap. This meaning, though, of it being an altar is also supported by the Mesha stele, where King Mesha says that he dragged an Ariel from the city that he captured from the Jews into the presence of his god Chemosh. And although some identify this as a captured altar, others see it possibly as an individual, again, opening up to a particular role, that perhaps they captured a priest or a warrior and drug him before his god Chemosh. We're not sure, but one of the traditional understandings, though, is that he captured a sacred area and took the altar from that area and brought it into the temple of his god Chemosh, which would fit with practice at the time. Others connect it with Ugaritic, Canaanite, Hittite, and Hurrian words meaning a companion or a warrior. So in short, there is no agreement as to what this word means. It seems to have an association with a lion, but also an altar, and also a priesthood function, and an emissary of peace, and possibly a warrior or champion. It's all over the place. If you look at Ezekiel 43:15, where it refers to it as an altar here, it has, and the Ariel itself was 4 cubits, and from the Ariel upwards were 4 horns. So we've got this definite idea of an altar there, but it's unclear why Jerusalem has this title, and it's even less clear that it had only a single meaning. So it is probably that this word is a complex word with multiple meanings, and as we get to its usage later on in the chapter, it seems that Isaiah may be playing off these multiple meanings, although we're not entirely clear which ones. So the verse continues here, add year to year, let the feasts run their round. Run their round is an interesting word, nakof. It's fairly uncommon. It only shows up in the call form here. This seems to indicate some time passing as the people of the city live their lives, that the festivals are cycling through the year. And then it says here, and I will bring distress to Ariel, and she shall have moaning and groaning, and she shall be to me like an Ariel. Moaning and groaning. This is a unique phrase that only occurs here and also in Lamentations chapter 2, verse 5. Ta'aniya va'aniya. Note that it not only rhymes, it's almost the same word. These two words only occur together, and it is believed that they are used this way for intensity, not dissimilar from how tohu and vohu is used in Genesis 1. So we have ta'aniya va'aniya. And it shall be to me as an Ariel. This last bit here is a little bit enigmatic. it is possible that the sense here is that the city itself will take the role of an Ariel. But what does that mean? Does that mean it will take the role of a messenger of peace? Does that mean that the city will be like some sort of a priesthood official? Or here's an interesting one. Maybe the city will become like an altar where the people of the city are being burned up on it as an offering. That's one of the theories as to what it means when it says, I will make the city as an Ariel. The verse strongly implies that the word has more than one meaning, and Isaiah is playing off these multiple meanings. So perhaps in one meaning it's saying something positive, like the Lion of God will be turned into a sacrificial altar. That's an interesting concept there that perhaps is what's being meant here, but we're not entirely sure. It appears that Isaiah is first using the word as a proper name for the city, and then that the city is going to turn into one of these other meanings for the word. But unfortunately, there are so many opinions that we're at a bit of a loss as to exactly what Isaiah's meaning is here with the use of this word. Then we go on to verse 3. And I will encamp against you all around. Or possibly, I will encamp against you like David, and will besiege you with towers, and I will raise siege works against you. So this phrase, all around, the traditional text here has the word door, which means a circle, also means a generation. But one of the letters that gets confused in Hebrew all the time are the letters R and D, or Resh and Dalet. They look very similar, and a few manuscripts have the different letter here. So instead of reading it as door, it reads it as David. And given that translation here, it says, I will encamp against you like David. Both work pretty well in context here, but David is appealing because he was already mentioned at the beginning of this chapter and as the one that encamped against the city previously. So that would make a lot of sense to refer back to him again here. That just like David took the city from the Jebusites, the city will now be threatened by the Assyrians. And also the siege here generally involves surrounding the city. So the word door could work there. But I think that the stronger argument here is that David reflects back to the opening verse, the city that David encamped against. Now here it's in the first person, which is presumably a reference to God, that God will encamp against the city like David did. I will note that the Septuagint, the Greek version, also supports this idea that it reads like David rather than a roundabout. The word for towers here is mutzav, and we're a little uncertain what this word means. It's obvious it's a military term of some type, and it is parallel with the slightly less obscure matsurot. Both of these are some type of siege work used to take walled cities. We don't know precisely what type of siege work they were. As I said, these words are obviously military. They're obviously closely related, if not synonyms for each other. And they probably deal with some type of specific utilities that were used by armies at that time to take walled cities. You had various types of towers and ramps that you would push up against the city wall, and all of these had technical names. We're probably talking about some technical names for such devices, although we don't know precisely what kind of devices anymore. Going on to verse 4 here. And should you be brought down, from the earth you shall speak, and from the dust she will be low, your saying. And he shall be like a ghost from the earth, your voice. And from the dust your saying shall chirp. Well, we're talking here about necromancy, basically. That should you be brought down, should the city be destroyed, the people of the city, we would assume, are going to speak from the dead. That they're going to speak from the earth. And we have here that he's talking out of the dust, very low and soft, like a ghost. The word for ghost here is the word ov, which is a specific word for a ghost that has been summoned through necromancy for consultation or prophecy. And we have here the idea that from the dust, their sayings are going to chirp. This word chirp is this lovely onomatopoeic tsaf, We had it back in chapter 8, verse 19. We had it in chapter 10, verse 14. And we're going to see it again in chapter 38, verse 14. It is used only 4 times, and all of them in Isaiah. Twice it refers to birds chirping, and twice it refers to the dead speaking. So the idea that Zion would be destroyed and speak from the dust like a ghost is not something that happens in the time of Isaiah. Scholars generally put this chapter as describing the siege that happens in 701 BCE, but really this has to be some sort of a prophecy into the future where Jerusalem is actually destroyed and then restored. That's going to take place about 100 years later after the life of Isaiah. So how will they speak from the dead? Well, we'll get to that in the second half of the chapter. But we're told that should Jerusalem be brought down, they will speak from the dead, and their voice will chirp from the dust. Because this is probably a prophecy of the future here, I preferred to translate this verse as an Ariel mood, since the verb is a converted perfect, should you be brought down, which is a common use of the converted perfect, and it seems to fit here better as an eventual outcome and not an immediate one. If you'd like to understand more about the Ariel mood and how converted verbs work, I've had a very popular video explaining how Hebrew tense works. Verse 5, and shall be like fine dust, the commotion of your insolent ones, and like chaff passing, the commotion of the ruthless. Well, some translations read here the commotion of your foreign ones in the first line. The Dead Sea Scrolls has an alternate word here that is also supported by the Septuagint and also the Syriac. It is another confusion between the letters D and R. The Dead Sea Scrolls reading of insolent here fits the parallel with ruthless much better, I feel, and therefore is the better reading. And it's really easy to get these words mixed up. I saw this as a footnote in the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, and I actually had to go back and forth several times between the footnote and the text because I just could not see what the difference was in the two words. D's and R's look very similar in Hebrew, and especially if you're dyslexic like I am, it's sometimes really hard to spot small differences like that. And so certainly a scribe could have easily got these letters mixed up, and they quite frequently did. It's one of the more common errors we see in the text. The metaphor implies a great number of tyrants overrunning the city, but also the fleeting nature of it as chaff that passes in the wind or fine dust that's blown away. So we have the idea that there's a lot of people attacking the city, but they're not going to be very successful. They're going to be blown away or just pass off like chaff with the wind. This fits the 701 invasion quite well, where they are not successful in taking Jerusalem. And it shall be in an instant suddenly, you shall be visited from the Lord of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and a mighty voice, with whirlwind and tempest and the flame of a devouring fire. Great verse. So you'll notice here that I took the line that is often associated with verse 5 and moved it down here to verse 6. I think it belongs in verse 6 better. It fits much more closely with what follows in 6, that this is what's going to happen suddenly. That suddenly the Lord of hosts, and this is his military title, the Lord of armies, is going to show up, and he's going to have thunder and earthquake and mighty voice. All of this is associated with great noise and shaking here, the thunder and the earthquake and the mighty voice. And then he has this other weather phenomenon here of whirlwinds and tempests, and interestingly, fire as well, associated with these great winds and storm imagery. So we have both the thunder and the shaking, and we have the winds and the storm imagery showing here as the Lord of armies shows up to pay attention to his people. Now, this, you shall be in an instant suddenly visited. This word visited is one that can mean both positive and negative. We've had it a few times before that the Lord would visit Leviathan, and that was obviously a negative one. Here he's going to visit with this great impressive display. It does sound like it would be very negative, at least very negative for somebody. But we find out as we go a little further that it's not negative towards the city, it's negative towards the invaders. But part of why I bring this part from verse 5 down here to verse 6, and in an instant suddenly, the Hebrew is patepeton. It's a nice little wordplay there, and we're going to have several wordplays here in this little bit. These words seem to obviously belong with the wordplays that follow. He also has thunder, earthquake, bara'am, bara'ash, and he has whirlwind, tempest, sufa, sa'ara. And it's a very musical sounding bit here that he's obviously using wordplay and sound meaning on these of what's going to happen here. And it draws this image of a sudden appearance of the Lord and a complete change of futures for everybody that he's going to show in this dramatic fashion and have this overwhelming thing happen. Now, we do have here with the word visited, the word pachad, we do have it interestingly used with the preposition ma'im, which when combined with the Lord always does seem to be a positive visit, not a negative one. So take that as you will. It does seem that this is a positive thing for Israel when it comes down to place, although a very negative one for their attackers. And we have in verse 7, it shall be like a dream, a vision of the night, the commotion of all nations, marshaling against Ariel, all that marshal against her, and besiege her, and distress her. So this idea of a dream of the night, it does match the 701 BCE protection against Assyria. If you recall that story, which we're going to actually get to it in a few chapters here, you recall that story, they all wake up dead men. They besiege the city, things look hopeless, they have this dramatic back and forth from the walls of the city, and the next morning, Assyria is just all dead. And so the idea that this is just going to be like a dream in the night that just vanishes, that fits the 701 very nicely. However, the thunders and the earthquake do not. As usual, Isaiah may be speaking about several things at once. Most likely, this redemption of Zion that he is talking about is at least partially a dramatic future event, that he is using imagery from the 701 event to also signal some great future event as well. Because while the 701 event was many things, it was not thunder and lightning and earthquakes and tempests. It was quite interesting that they just all had a plague or some other disaster that hit them and they were all dead in the morning. The commotion of the nations that's mentioned here, attacking Zion, does reflect the commotion of the insolent and the commotion of the ruthless ones that we had back in verse 5. The word here that I chose, marshal, as this verb here, this is a word that is closely related to the word hosts from Lord of Hosts, meaning armies or hosts. And I wanted a word that reflected the sense of an organized army. And this was the best word I could think of in English to represent that here. So when I talk about those that are marshaling against them, this is the same root as the word for armies or hosts in Lord of Hosts. And we have also this idea, the besiege her and distress her. This, again, looks like a DR mix-up. But the D that is recorded in the traditional text is not a word that anybody knows the meaning of. So everybody kind of assumes here that this really should be an R. So there's not a lot of argument about this one, but the traditional text has a dalet here, and it pretty clearly should be a resh. And this is actually a return of the word for the siege works that we had back in verse 3 that has now been followed by a verb to bring distress, which matches the verb that we had back in verse 2, making this sort of an extended chiastic structure. So obviously these are different parts of the same poem here that he's relating back to each other, much like he did with relating David back earlier. So this is a thing that Isaiah tends to do a lot, and he's doing here where he's bringing back these words from earlier in the poem. And he continues with the dream imagery here. As when a hungry man dreams, and behold, he is eating, and awakes, and his soul is empty. Or when a thirsty man dreams, and behold, he is drinking, and awakes, and behold, he is faint, and his soul thirsts. The idea that all these enemies that are bent on the destruction of Jerusalem are just going to vanish like a nightmare when the sleeper awakes, this image is brought forward here, and we kind of have this strange move where we move the simile from Israel having a nightmare of them being there and waking up and them not being there, to the Assyrians are now the ones dreaming, and they're dreaming perhaps that they are consuming the city, and they now wake up and find that their hunger and their thirst have not been satisfied. So we kind of swapped dreamers in the simile here. We went from Jerusalem having a nightmare about them to them having a dream where they were feasting and eating, only to find that they were not feasting and eating. So we have both sides dreaming here, and both sides waking up to find the dream was not as they supposed. There is this interesting phrase on the second line here, and behold, he is faint. Some manuscripts are missing this line, and it does seem to break the symmetry of the second line. It actually reads much better if you just delete the "and behold, he is faint" there. It reads much more closely parallel to the line above it. So perhaps that was added later by a less skilled writer. It doesn't seem to fit well with the parallelism of the two lines. And then we have a final closing couplet here. And so shall the commotion of all the nations be that marshal against Zion. Okay, it's not really a couplet, but extended line. I think this is a great spot to end this, not because what follows is not also related to this, but long videos don't do as well as short videos. So this is going to be where we're going to stop it here, that all the commotion of all these nations that have marshaled against Mount Zion are going to be like this dream that is just shattered. They're not going to succeed. But we also have the threat that should Zion fall, she will speak from the ground as a ghost. That we're going to get into that more in the second half. How is Zion going to speak to us as though she were a ghost speaking from the earth? And for that, we'll have to wait till the next time. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.